just getting started, as you all was talking about Black history, the month of February is when we here in the United States celebrate Black history. If I could go ahead and get you to click on Black History Month. Or should I click on it? I can click on it. Okay, thank you. Very good. And I'll just go down. Just to let you know about the cards is something we put together here at Black Heritage Society, and just letting people relate to their identity. As African Americans, our identity was not given to us, so we had to really learn about our identity. So we're letting African Americans know that to value your power. Africans are across the globe significantly contributing to a divine change. I'd like to know that we're loving people, that we understand what it is to have differences, and we want to accept people as they are, so we call that inclusion. So as African Americans, I can say we truly appreciate being here with you all today. We're going to go ahead and get started and just let you know. Black History Month is the time to honor the achievements of African Americans in the U.S. history. The event grew out of Negro History Week by Carter G. Woodson. Other countries around the world now celebrate Black history. So we think that's a great accomplishment. As they say, we're going to move to the next slide. Some say we're better when we all come together. This is Carter G. Woodson. Just letting y'all look at a picture. He dedicated his life to Black history. Our history include, for some of us, traveling across the transatlantic slave trade. Go to the next slide. In 1662. Scroll down, please. Segment of the global slave trade that transported between 10 million and 12 million enslaved people, Africans, across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americans from the 16th to the 19th century. Next slide. And they put them as cargo. So they were on a cargo ship, as you can see. In the 17th and 18th century, enslaved Africans were transported to the Americans and forced into slavery in the American colonies, and exploited to work on tobacco, rice, indigo plantations of the southern coast, from the Chesapeake Bay colonies of Maryland and Virginia south to Georgia. Next slide. It is estimated that the American slave trade, the process of people, was acquired and sold, next slide, into slavery, resulted in the death of 5 million people or more, just from all of that. Those were dark days for the USA. And next slide. Next, we had the Civil Rights War. And that happened in 1862. The Emancipation Proclamation, it came out when Abraham Lincoln did sign it into law, well, signed it in 1863. Next slide. In 1915, after the 13th Amendment, which abolished of slavery in the United States, Mr. Woodson felt that the role of blacks and their contribution was being ignored, and he sought it out to change it. He founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Today, it is known as the Association of African American Life and History. And you know that we just recently had the banned books, unfortunately. But we can say here at Black Heritage Society, we have acquired some of those banned books from the library as well as school. So again, you know, our history, we're trying to hold on to our history. And as you may know, history is really important. Some say when you know your history, you know where you come from and you know where you're going. You can plan out where you're going. So history is real important. Next slide. In 1926, the creation of History Week. The choosing of the second week of February to coincide with the birthday of, I told you about him, former President Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. They were prominent advocates for the African American people. The event inspired schools and community nationwide. In 1976, it was recognized as Black History Month by former President Gerald Ford. So we was glad of that. Carter G. Woodson, needless to say, he dedicated his whole life to the study of Black history and an advocate for his people. He passed away in 1950. Next slide. Today, Black history is a time to honor the contributions of and legacy of African Americans across the U.S. history and society, such as Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and more. We like to think that we're all inclusive. So the next slide, please. Just so you all know, I gave you, I'm gonna go over Black inventors. Gave you a little sheet there, just kind of tell you, can I see that picture? Just kind of give you an idea of the inventors of African Americans and their contributions here in the USA. So, quick overview there. George Washington Carver. How many heard of George Washington Carver? Yeah, the young people, I'm sure. Yeah. So, he was good because he invented 300 different ways to use peanuts. Now, he didn't invent the peanuts, that was planted. But he invented 300 different ways. And if you take science, you're going to hear about it. So he was instrumental in that. The next slide, please. Mark Dean. He was invented the IBM personal computer. Okay, how many of you use a computer? Yeah, I know when that I would say machine came out, I was afraid of it. In fact, my kids had to help me use the computer. We started off with typewriters. Do you all remember the typewriter? Okay, that's how I started out, with the typewriter. But when they came out with the computer, I was afraid of it. In fact, I just turned it on and turned it off. But as time moves on, we can't do without a computer today. Now we have the phones, the cell phones, and internet is just such an amazing informational tool for information. So the computer definitely has come a long, long ways. We also want to highlight George Crumb invented the potato chip. And how many of you eat potato chips? Y'all know the one that called Lay's potato chips? And no one can just eat one. And I'm not doing a promotion for Lay's, I'm just saying. But George Crumb, when he was, he accidentally came up with the potato chip. And what happened was he was cooking and he served a customer. And the customer became disgruntled or upset with the food. So he sent the food back to the kitchen. And he said he wanted it thin. So George got very creative. And his magic, he was able to make that potato so thin, and he cooked it, and it became a chip. Isn't that interesting? And from that, he was able to, he was able to make magic chips out of one man's discontent in 1853. So in 1860, he opened up his own restaurant and had a bowl of chips on each table. Now, that is taking taking lemons and making lemonade. Have y'all heard of that little slogan? When something is bad happens, don't get just so disenchanted. He made a terrible situation and then he turned it around for good. So he was able to launch his own business, and he had patented the potato chip. And now all of us can't have too much of them, but I do enjoy me a Lay's potato chip. Let's see here. And we're going to go to the next slide. Let's see. Granville T. Woods invented the device that allowed train dispatchers to navigate planes, supposed to be planes, and planes on takeoff and landing in 1887. I want to say those devices where you hold them up and you tell everybody which way to go. I'm not a navigator for the plane, but I just know that's what they may be. Alexander Miles, he impacted the safety of elevators with his automatic mechanism that closed both the elevator door and the elevator cage. It drastically increased elevator safety. What happened was a lot of people didn't want to ride the elevators when they first came out because you got injured. So he was able to come up with a device, and he made it safe for people to travel. And today we still have some of those same technology working. So that's really fascinating. Next slide. Thomas Edison often gets credit for inventing the light bulb, but inventor Louis Latimer created a light bulb that used a carbon filament, which lasts longer and made the light bulb more productive and cheaper. When Thomas Edison, he made the light bulb, they said it only lasts maybe 15 minutes or so. So when they put their heads together, great minds, they were able to make, with the filament, they were able to make the light bulb last longer. Next slide. And the filament, we all know, is that little part that goes across. Now, how many of you looked at a light bulb? Have y'all looked at a light bulb? And do you see that little thin line? And if you drop that light bulb and that breaks, guess what? No light. So it's very important, right? So we wouldn't think something that small is so significant. So that just lets us know even the smallest creation, our tools that we're blessed with, everybody can use them. We can make a difference. So we was glad that he was able to come up with just that little bitty filament, because really, do you have lights in your home? What home does not have lights? Not very many. So the light bulb is essential in this day and time. All righty. Next slide, please. And I want to say Sarah Breedlove Walker established a line of beauty products. And she was very successful because many of us have to get our hair done. What ladies don't like to get their hair done? So she was very successful in that day and time. Dr. Charles Drew was the first American Red Cross blood bank due to his groundbreaking work on blood storage. He created the ability to store blood for long periods of time. And you all may not have not received a blood transfusion, hopefully not, but have anyone gave blood? How many of you given blood? Oh, good, good. Giving blood is great. He invented the technology where the blood lasts longer, so that people may, if people don't get blood by a certain time, they may die without blood. So he invented a mechanism, we have boxes and the way you can keep blood so that it lasts longer, it can travel to different locations, and it is a life-saving ordeal for someone to get blood. So we're very grateful for all the creations. And of course, he was a doctor, so a lot of wonderful things happen as a consequence of having that technology and that mindset. I think we're on the next slide. I think we're getting down to, In 1896, Philip Dowling invented a mailbox designed to protect the mail. Believe it or not, they used to just leave the mail out there on the counter or something, on the street, out there in the element, and it was not safe. So he had the idea, sensational idea, and he was able to create a box and secure the mail. And what do we have in front of our homes? Many of us, some of us have it in front of our homes. What do we call it? A mail box. Well, you wouldn't think of something that simple, but it's so important because now we're able to receive mail. Now, they do have a bigger mailbox in some communities. I think they're the community mailbox. So you see that, and it has a key. But isn't it nice that your mail is safe? Now, if you like some of your grandparents, or if you know some grandparents, we might be waiting on our check. So that mailbox is real important around the first of the month. So, so that mailbox. Okay. And just so you all look at the other sheet that I have, if y'all don't mind sharing, and I'll give this away as well. But this is another tool that just kind of let you know about the inventions of African Americans here in the USA. That's letting us know our history so that we can be proud of it, because everybody wants to feel proud of their history. And so these are some of the, as I stated, the mailbox, pencil sharpener, George L. Love. Then we had the spark plug, as you can see. We have the stethoscope. We had a lot of invention in the medical field. The guitar. How many of you have played musical instruments? The piano, the guitar. So all of these was inventions. Some of these are inventions of the African Americans. The ironing board. How many likes to iron them clothes until you get a crease? You want it looking very nice. So it may not seem like much, but these were very important, and it impacted lives not only here in the United States, but really all over the world. So we're grateful, and that's why we utilize Black History Month for, just to highlight, to share with others the accomplishments of African Americans here in the United States. We, as African Americans, I can say we believe in inclusion. We all have our culture, and yours may be a little different than mine, but we're all human beings. And I like to think of people as brothers and sisters when we are talking about the human race. So thank you all. This kind of ends my part of the presentation, but Ms. Johnson is going to touch on the other part of our presentation. I'm going to check to see where she's at. Just so I can go ahead and give her a little time. Do we have any questions about the information? Yes, sir.
So I was always wondering, at one point of time, it was called niggers or Negroes, and then it changed to African American. Who was the one who brought that change? Who was the instrumental person?
We went in the 1960s, we started saying Black Power. Okay. So we kind of changed it simultaneously. I think that may have been some of the action we went, especially 1960 and 1970 after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. We still trying to establish our power, our significance. That's real important as a people, for us to know where we're going, where we come from, so we know where we're going. So I think the latest term they may be trying to use is Blacks Foundational people. I don't quite understand that, but maybe that's talking about with the children from the birth of the Africans that they brought over. Then they're the foundational Blacks. Many of us, as the Blacks, they tell you about the White House. How many of you know the White House was built by? They're just smart over here. So in the beginning, I told you, they used the Blacks, the African Americans, as slaves. It is a part of history that we may not be proud of, but it is a part of history. That's the American history. And if nothing else, we can grow and learn how to embrace each other's differences instead of trying to make human race be one conformity or something. We have a...
Can you maybe talk a little bit about Black Heritage Society?
Black what, sir?
Black Heritage Society in Houston.
Sure.
So what are the locations, the members, that functioning? If you can just walk us through a little bit.
Thank you for that. So for Black Heritage Society, we've been established. We first established in 1974, and it was Ovite Duncantel Jr., as well as Vida Willard, and we had some other board members. And Ms. Helen Johnson, when she comes up, she was instrumental in helping to write the nonprofit articles and incorporation to get it to the state. So they wanted to create a sense of identity in the African American community. So that was headed up by Ovite Duncantel Jr. Then in 1978, this was during the Civil Rights time when they just passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And everybody's trying to, as African Americans, we're trying to assimilate in the society. So That was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's when he was real strong, and they did a lot of nonviolence in the communities. So, Mr. Ovite Duncantel, they kept looking at Dr. Martin Luther King. So that, everybody was like, oh, we're going to follow him. And then we also had Malcolm X at the time, and they were looking at him too. But Dr. Martin Luther King was special because he was about nonviolence. And it was a lot of civil unrest still, in the community. So, unfortunately, in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. So, by this time, Mr. Ovite Duncantel, our late founder, it was in 1978, as I stated. The Black Power was going strong, and we were, as a people, trying to find our identity. So, Mr. Ovite Duncantel, our late founder, he decided, after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, he decided that we was going to have a parade to honor Dr. Martin Luther King, his life, his legacy, and his teaching. Because we accomplished so much, but we still searching for our identity. So that is the reason why Mr. Ovite Duncantel Jr., he established the first parade in Houston, Texas, along with the first street name after Dr. Martin Luther King in 1978. So today, we go around talking to people about Black heritage. We talk to individuals like you about Black Heritage Month, Juneteenth, and the reason why we celebrate. So especially African Americans, so they know their identity, but also for other ethnicities so that we can share. Some of us may have the same plight. Unfortunately, those things that happened in our past, and maybe just sharing will open up ideas on how we can do more, better together. So that is the reason why, that was one of the reasons why we were established in 1978. We had the first parade. But Mr. Ovite Duncantel Jr., he was an advocate for the people. The tree, we call it the tree of life. He was out there promoting what it is to do for his people. He wanted us to have the voting rights. He wanted us to have some of the social services. He wanted us to be able to get our history, have access to it. So you have to understand, back in those days, it was very hard for us to get our history. So everybody, and pretty much like yourself, we were reading and trying to do what we could to get to know more about our people. Does that help a little bit? Okay. We have any more questions? All right. Now, so you all can go back and you can look at some of the inventions of African Americans, and you can also look at some of the inventions in your culture that you all have made contributions. And we do more together. Let us keep building. You all are young people. Y'all like science. Y'all like computers. So it's a vast world out there. So let us continue to share and see what we can do more, better together. At this time, I'm going to invite our illustrious speaker, our other speaker, Miss Helen Johnson. I know she got up the elevator. I sent you a text on the elevator. Did you see it?
No.
Oh.
But she took the elevator.
And Ms. Johnson, I just finished up talking to them about Black history and Carter G. Woodson and his accomplishment and promoting our history, because before that time, we didn't have a history. So they have a better understanding of the work of Carter G. Woodson. So I'll let you take it from here. Any questions before I turn the mic over? Okay, at this time, I'm going to hand the mic. Thank you. You all gave her a beautiful introduction, even though she wasn't here to hear it.
I see you're trying to find out more about us, and we were delighted to have met with your two representatives Thursday. And I found out in that dialogue that everybody wanted to know more about the Black Americans. Well, they call us something else now, you know. We've been all kinds of names. We've been colored, Negro, Afro-American, African-American, Black American. Now we're fundamental Black Americans, or foundational Black Americans. And that gives you some idea as to how we've been manipulated and brainwashed throughout the years. And as I was telling them on Thursday, everything started with a lie. And that lie was that Black Africans were unintelligent. Black Africans were savages. And Black Africans were born inferior. Now, all of this, I had to remember though, when I was in college, I had a Hungarian French teacher. I loved French. I would translate everything into French. I just loved French. And my Hungarian teacher saw that I liked history, something I didn't like when I was in high school because it never told me about us. And so he told me, I want you to get this journal. It was a French journal. And when I started translating, I was surprised. Number one, I didn't know about all of the revolutions. I didn't know about the insurrections. I thought that, like they told us, that we just were slaves and they were slaughtering us and doing everything. But when I read that French story, a story of my people, I saw where in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture actually led a revolution and kicked the French out of Haiti. But the French said, okay, you have your independence, but you will never prosper because we're going to cut off all the trade. And the Haitians say they wanted their freedom, they didn't care. So you see what's happening to Haiti even now. They cut off the trade, and the Haitians have suffered all of these years because of that. And backing up to the lie that I started to tell you about, it was a group of Europeans, white Europeans, that met. Countries that call themselves white. And they met and they decided after the Moors were defeated. You know about the Moors, right? We don't know about the Moors. Okay. Going back to my French lessons then. The Moors were Black conquerors. They were navigators. They were astronomers. They were scientists. They were men of renown. And they were great warriors. So they conquered European countries. And they ruled for almost 900 years. They were there in Spain and France and other European territories, but nobody wanted to tell you about that. They called it the Dark Ages. So when you see the Dark Ages, you know it's the Moors that's ruling Europeans. black Moors. And of course, they were Asians, black Moors, and they were Muslim. At that time, the Europeans were mostly peasants. They didn't bathe. They were disease-ridden. They were dying. They were uneducated. All of the things that they said about the black Africans, that's what they were. It's really sad. But the Moors, unlike the Christians, the Moors took them and taught them about good hygiene. The Moors sent them to school. The Moors trained them, and the Moors allowed them to practice their religion, unlike the Christians. So, Queen Isabella in Spain and King Ferdinand, after so many years, decided that, they were going to get the Moors out of their country. And the Moors were taking, out of France, they were taking 300 maidens a year. So white people were actually enslaved before the black folk. Nobody talked about that. The only enslaved white people they talk about are the Irish. No, it's more than the Irish. But getting back to this, the Moors finally, nearing the end of their reign, they were going to Cordoba, Spain, and it was one way in. Well, the Catholics, mostly the Europeans, had gotten together, they pooled their money, they had gotten forces in from everywhere to help them defeat the Moors. The Moors coming in and thinking nothing's happening, and all of a sudden they were attacked. Well, the Moors would have won if they had just held on a little while longer, because the Christians were out of ammunition. They didn't have any ammunition now. Queen Isabella was ruthless, relentless. She was a redhead, so when you hear them admiring a red-headed woman, it's because of Queen Isabella. Anyway, Queen Isabella said, "Get them, we're going to get them." So they defeated the Moors. The Moors hightailed it out of there. And from then on, they said, okay, burn the libraries. Everything that gives all of the information about them, we want it destroyed. They had been in power for almost 900 years, so it was a lot about the Moors. But Queen Isabella said, destroy everything. They must never know their history. So that gives you some idea as to how this all began. Then we have the big meeting in Europe. Europeans, not one black African, but the Europeans got together and they divided up the continent of Africa among themselves. And that's the beginning of the problem. They went in to colonize the Africans. Now understand that Africa, that Africa is a continent. And they have people thinking it's a country, and a lot of them don't know the difference. But these were different countries, as you know, and the people spoke different languages. So when they went in, posing as good-hearted Christians, loving them, going to be good to them, do all kinds of nice things that Christians do, they gained the confidence of the Africans. And they learned that the Africans really were not communicating with each other in the different areas. Certain villages spoke different languages. Some of them hated the others. And I understand that there were black Hebrew Jews that did not really associate with the other African villagers. And they didn't like them. And Africans helped to conquer them for the Europeans. And that's why you have that problem about the Africans helping. Well, the Hebrew Jews were not of the same culture. And anywhere that they were in Africa, they stayed to themselves, and they had their own way of life. They had their own religion. They were different, and they stayed together. That's one part of it. The other part of it, you say, well, why haven't you gotten together and helped yourselves? Now, number one, remember, these are different countries. They're speaking different languages. And they understood that, and maybe they were looking at the Bible. I think a lot of what they did is a strategy from the Bible, where they say God confused the tongues. So when they went in, or they bought when the slaves, they had bought the slaves, they did not put those who spoke the same language together. So that way they couldn't have an insurrection, because they couldn't communicate, for so many years. But one of my pet peeves is with the first Angolans in the English colony. Now, Portugal, Spain, those Moors who were over those countries, they already had slaves in certain areas of what we call the Americas. But the English colonists were just coming in and getting established. In 1619, before the Mayflower, because the Mayflower came in 1620, but a year before that, there were some young boys, and that's another thing they don't tell you. Most of these slaves were what we would call teenagers here. But you didn't have teenagers there in their tribes, because once you reach monarchy, then you were an adult. And that means, when girls have their periods and boys start sperm, night initials, whatever. When that occurred, then they considered you an adult. So on most of those ships then, they had these little bitty chains, little bitty with shackles and all of that, because they had these young children. Well, some boys from Angola were playing from Nwanga or something like that. I don't remember the exact name. They were playing on the seashore there, on the shore, and a Dutch ship was passing by and saw the boys. So they stopped and they went in to talk to the boys. Now, I understand the Christians had already been there, so they were accustomed to the white people talking to them, coming in and communicating with them. And they told the boys that they told them the ship was a beautiful vessel and all of that, and asked them had they ever been inside one. And curious as children were, the boys wanted to see inside the ship. Evidently, nobody told them what had been happening, but news probably wasn't getting out. Or if it was, they thought that it was all positive, whatever happened. So the boys got on the ship, 25 to 30 boys. They got on the ship, and what did they do? They set sail. Well, when they got so far out in the Atlantic, an English pirate ship intercepted them. And they thought that they had gold and silver and other precious metals, and they were going to have these treasures. And you don't want me to stop and you stand up and stretch a bit before I go on?
Oh, you're good.
No? Okay. And so they captured the ship. They overtook, they killed the crew, and the English pirates took the ship. And they sailed to Jamestown. When they found they had a human cargo, they didn't know what to do with human cargo. And understand now, England did not have slavery in the English colonies. The colonies that were in America, they did not have slavery there. It was not approved for them. So these young Angolans, when they got to Jamestown, Virginia, they didn't know what to do with them. So they traded them for victuals. They needed food, and they traded the boys. Well, what happened was they made the boys indentured servants, since that's what everybody else was. You know, they would come in, you would become an indentured servant. And that meant that you would work from 4 to 7 years. You would do whatever they told you to do, 4 to 7 years. At the end of your servitude, you were a free person. They would give you land. They would give you all of the rights and privileges of the other colonies. And that's what happened. That's what happened with these young boys. Well, it just so happened that Africans were skilled artisans. They could do woodwork, they could do ironwork, they could farm, they could do all of that. Well, the English colonists didn't have those skills. So, guess what? The boys then became wealthy and they were able to marry white women and indigenous women, the Native American women. They could marry those women. There was no racial discrimination in the English colonies at that time in 1619. Even though they're trying to tell you that was the beginning of slavery, no. There was no slavery in the English colonies in 1619. And these young men became wealthy because they had the skills. And the indigenous people that we call Native Americans or whatever name they've given to those different tribes, they married them, you know. They could ride horses. They were just good, okay? But nobody wants to give them that credit. Now, something happened in all of the Caribbean and the islands and everything. Something went contrary to what white men wanted, and that was that the women preferred these African men. Some of them even bought them as their slaves so they could be with them, and this was disturbing. So, around 1672, they convinced England to let them have slaves, to let the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, come to the colonies. But the Angolans that were free, they were free people, you know. They called them Melungeons. And instead of letting people know that they were really Africans later on, they said that they were Mediterranean whites. So they had their papers. And if you had your paper showing where your ancestor was actually one of the Angolans, then you were free. They were free people. But they said, oh, okay, that was disturbing to a lot of them. So they passed that law in 1672 about slavery, to have slavery. Then they made it, they prohibited intermarriages. So the men could no longer marry white women or the Native American women. And if they should have married them, they would make his offspring slaves. And so then we had where the Melungeons, that I'll call them, started leaving from out of the colonies, and they went to Texas, and they went to Louisiana, they went to Mexico, they went to different places, and they might call them mulatto. Of course, all of that followed them later on. But when we had slavery though, that's what really hurt me, because slavery was something that was well known on the continent of Africa. It had been, you had slaves for years, but you had chattel slavery in the Americas. And this is when they actually relegated these African slaves to subhuman status. They were no longer human beings. If you were a slave in other places, you were still a human being. But here, you were not a human being. The black slaves then were treated as livestock. They took branding irons and branded them. when they brought the young boys over from the country, they had busting activities. And I don't know what your children know, bug busting, the adults know. They sodomized the boys and did it publicly. In other words, they molested the boys. They did things like that, things that no human being should even be exposed to. Is what these slaves had to go through. They treated them worse than animals. They fed our babies to the alligators and the crocodiles, so that as crocodile food. And on the ships, when they ran out of food, they would kill the Africans and cook them and feed them to the crew. It was just that bad, but they were not human to them. These were not human beings. This is livestock. So this is what the glory details of what really happened to us. And that's why they don't want the books to tell the story. They don't want you to know what really went on. And in 1808, when they stopped the transatlantic trade slave, the Americans could not do without the slaves. What did they do? They came up with another scheme, and this time they were coming up with their own production. And the slave master would go and rape the slave woman and get his own children. So they came up with their own crop. They weren't supposed to do that. It's such a long, long story. And you ask why you didn't do anymore. But when they freed the slaves, finally, and Abraham Lincoln, I'm going to move forward fast because it's so much to tell. When they freed the slaves, it was over 4 million slaves. It was 4 times as many slaves as slave owners and their families. Now, you wonder what happened. Well, in Natchez, Mississippi, when it was so many of them, when they freed them, the town didn't have enough room for all of the freed slaves. And what they did, and the federal government was complicit in this too, they built concentration camps in Natchez, Mississippi, and this happened all over, I'm sure. Now, remember, it's 4 times as many slaves. And in this particular concentration camp, 20,000 free slaves were put in a pit. It's like a pit. They couldn't get out. They wouldn't feed them. They would work until they dropped. They killed them. And they set the place afire. And right now, they say if you go to Natchez, Mississippi, they call it the Devil's Punch Bowl. They're beautiful, beautiful peach trees. And they say the most beautiful peaches you've ever seen in your life are growing there right now. But the people don't pick those peaches. They don't eat those peaches because they know that it came from the Devil's Punch Bowl. But as I close here, yes, you say we could have done better. When they freed the slaves, they didn't give them anything. You hear this about 40 acres and a mule. We didn't get any 40 acres and a mule. Some slaves had hired, well, that's another story, would hire themselves out because they had skills and they had money. Like my great-grandfather had over 700 acres of land. But, you know, they figured out a way to take it all from you anyway. But there was one story, and one insurrection that really caused the Civil War. And that was the one with Nat Turner. Think about it, 1851. Nat Turner was an ideal slave. He loved his master and his master's family. And he would do anything for him. But one day, another slave owner came to the plantation and saw his beautiful wife, and he wanted her. Well, the slave owner didn't want to sell it because, you know, he knew that Nat was a good slave. But the guy gave him a price that he couldn't refuse, and he sold Nat's wife. Nat knew how to read. Nat could write. Nat believed in God. And Nat read where evil people were slain. And Nat read where God represented freedom. And Nat said he wanted his freedom as he felt like he had been betrayed. He'd been a good slave. He had done like, see, they had a nigger Bible, they call us our Negro Bible. And that Bible had where the slaves had to honor their slave masters and love their slave masters, but they were not supposed to trust anybody but the slave master. And he found out that that wasn't even a complete Bible, Nat Turner. He had all of this hatred in him for his master. And what he did, he organized a group of slaves, and they revolted. They took machetes and they went in and they chopped up so many families. Horrific, yes, but he was hurt, he was angry, and it put the fear of God in the slave owners. They were so scared. They finally captured most of Nat's little army, whatever the little group was, and Nat escaped. But when they did catch him, they tried him, they hanged him, they chopped off his head, they took the skin off his body and made curtains of wood shoes and different things. They mutilated his body, in other words, but they were so afraid. And that's when the North said, oh no, it's not worth it, you know, we have to get rid of this slavery. And the South was saying, no, we want our slaves because that's the way we make our money. So we came up, we had the Civil War. And then after that, back to the 4 million black people. The 4 million, that's now 15% of the total population. So how did they go from 4 million, 4 times as many, to only 15% of the population? They're beginning to find mass graves like the Devil's Punch Bowl. They're finding mass graves everywhere. And when I was a girl, they told me that our apartment complex was built over the grave of slaves. So we knew that our people were buried in these different places, under the buildings, under your public buildings and all of that. So we're not surprised when you find out that slaves were buried there. Anyway, I'm going to stop because it's so much. And they told us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but they didn't give us any boots. So